Hi, everyone. Brad Free with David Aragona. This is Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch Top 20. We are 2.5 weeks out from the Run for the Roses. The Kentucky Derby field is pretty well set, but a development on Wednesday morning has impacted the potential lineup and the pace scenario. David, 3 adds and 3 drops from last week's list, none more significant than what transpired on Wednesday morning.
Yes, we did get some big news on Wednesday morning. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But before we get into that, I do want to note we're just over 2 weeks out from the Derby, and we do have packages on sale for Kentucky Derby PPs. So if you're going to buy some Oaks and Derby Pass performances, buy them in this package. You can save up to 39% on the value. You get betting strategies, player's guide. I'll be writing those betting strategies actually with Marcus Hirsch for Oaks and Derby Day, and also the clock reports from our colleague Mike Welsh. So you want to make sure that you get all of that so you have all the information at your disposal to handicap the Kentucky Derby. Find out more at shop.drf.com. But Brad, let me get back to what you were discussing and some of the changes coming in to Derby Watch this week. And yeah, we got some big news on Wednesday morning that the connections of Owen Almighty have reconsidered despite his disappointing 6th place finish in his final prep, the Bluegrass. He will be utilizing his 65 points to qualify for the Kentucky Derby, and they plan on running. So as we throw up our top 20 grid for this week, we've got some significant changes. We weren't planning on making too many changes this week, but we are digesting the recent news, so we had to add Owen Almighty to the list given the connection's intentions to run. As you can see, I don't rate his chances very highly. I don't think most people will, so that's why I've got him pegged at 50-1. We've also got Final Gambit added to the list. He is pegged at 30-1. I know we had been reserving judgment on adding him to the list, Brad, because he is a horse that has not yet won on the dirt, and the connection seemed like they were on the fence about whether or not to go with him. But based on a workout last week, it does sound like he is more confirmed than he had been to participate in the Kentucky Derby. And unfortunately, as we make way for some of these new additions, we are going to drop off the list Baeza, who probably deserves a spot in the field, but as we'll talk about in a little bit, he's deficient on points at the moment.
Owen Almighty, Final Gambit, and Matticat Road, the 3 additions to Derby Watch, the 3 we dropped. Baeza, as David mentioned. Heart of Honor, runner-up in the UAE Derby, is not going to contest the Kentucky Derby. And River Thames, 3rd in the Bluegrass, will point toward the Preakness. David, a couple odds tweaks that you made. Tap to Pan Street went from 12-1 to 10-1. I assume that's largely because Baeza, who you had at 15-1, is off the list, and Cole Battle down just slightly from 20-1 to 15-1 as far as those odds go. The 3 horses that we added, Final Gambit 30-1, Matticat Road, and Owen Almighty both at 50-1. So over the course of the last few weeks, David, you and I have kind of taken some editorial license when it comes to determining who is on the bubble. We're going to stand down from that and kind of relinquish control to Churchill Downs. They ultimately decide who's in the field. And let's talk about 4 horses who truly are on the bubble, because they are all still candidates for the Kentucky Derby, but none of the 4 are officially in the field yet. Let's take a look at the on the bubble list. These are horses ranked 21 through 24 on the Derby points list. David, not all 4 of these are confirmed runners for the Derby.
No, the connections of the number 21 built, who would be the first into the race if there are any further defections. His connections don't sound like they are so gung-ho to go into the Kentucky Derby. I mean, obviously his 5th place finish in the Louisiana Derby had to raise some questions about how far he really wants to go. So after that, they were planning on pointing to the Pat Day Mile, which seems like a more logical spot for built. We'll see if they get into the field and they have a change of heart, as Owen Almighty's connections have. Also, number 22, Neo Equos. We thought maybe they were thinking about passing the Derby, but recently there was reporting in the Daily Racing Form that the owners do want to run him. Brad, I haven't seen too much reporting on number 23, Render Judgment, so he is far from confirmed for the race, but we do know that Baeza, who unfortunately is still last on this list, his connections definitely want to run if they can get in.
They absolutely want to run, and so do racing fans across the country. He ran an outstanding race, finishing 2nd in the Santa Anita Derby, talking about Baeza. So if Built does go in the Pat Day Mile, and I think that's where he's going to ultimately end up, and Render Judgment, he's not confirmed 2.5 weeks out. If he passes, Then Neo Equos, third in the Florida Derby, and Fountain of Youth gets into the field, and Baeza would be the next one in, assuming Built and Render Judgment both defect. Just quickly about Baeza, because you know I like talking about him. I've been watching him train, and it was only 9 days after his runner-up finish in the Santa Anita Derby, a highly rated race that might be taxing for a less able horse. Baeza was out on the work tab Monday morning and worked. It was an easy half mile, but the fact that he came back that quickly after that solid race suggests to me, and also his body language in the workout and coming off the track full of life, full of energy, on his toes, suggests that, believe it or not, Baeza might have another forward move in him. He's already one of the fastest 3-year-olds in the country. We hope he gets a chance to run. I think everybody does. It almost seems like, it's really not a fair thing to say, I'll say it anyway, that Churchill Downs is kind of trying to sabotage its own race by extending the Baffert ban last year, by reducing available points in small fields in California. The objective, the idea, at least I believe, for the Kentucky Derby is to bring together the best 3-year-olds in the country at a 1 1/4. Am I being that? And Churchill Downs last couple of years, it seems like it's not going for that objective. Am I being unfair to Churchill Downs, David?
No, and we hashed this out last week, Brad, and I'll just kind of elaborate on what we were recapping about our thoughts on it then. Downgrading these races based on field size, it does not capture the real quality of these races. And I think we saw that in both the San Felipe and the Santa Anita Derby. Most would say those were the two strongest preps for the Kentucky Derby that were run anywhere in the country. And those are two races that took place in California and were downgraded with the points because they only had 5 participants. But obviously, when you're running to the wire with the Kentucky Derby favorite journalism, I think that speaks to a race of real quality. And from Churchill Downs' standpoint, I don't think you can say that we're going to stand by our assessment that field quality is determined by field size when you're adding in a new race on the Kentucky Derby Trail this year, like the Virginia Derby, that has no record of producing Kentucky Derby starters or horses that do well in the Kentucky Derby. It's just a new race on the calendar, and you're going to award 50 points to that race just because maybe you administer that race and downgrade the points to a race in California that are proven to be strong producers of Kentucky Derby contenders and Kentucky Derby winners. So, like we said, Churchill Downs over the years, I believe, has made moves towards fairness in how horses qualify for the Kentucky Derby. I do think this particular rule was a step backwards. I'm hopeful they're going to reassess it next year.
I'm sure they will. The Churchill Downs is run by some very intelligent people, and they will reevaluate the situation, and we'll see what happens next spring. The final Derby points race was run last weekend. It's a race that, for Kentucky Derby purposes, was largely irrelevant. And I'm talking about the Lexington Stakes at Keeneland. It offered 20 qualifying points for the Kentucky Derby. Sometimes it's a last-ditch effort for horses to gain points to get into the Kentucky Derby. That's not the case this year. None of the horses who ran in the Lexington Stakes are considered probable or even want to run in the Kentucky Derby. The race was won by a horse named Gosker. Gosker won the Lexington Stakes with an 87 Beyer speed figure. It's the lowest Beyer for a Lexington winner since Beyer speed figures were first published 35 years ago. Gosker is not running in the Kentucky Derby, but he is a candidate for the Preakness, along with River Thames and UAE Derby runner-up Heart of Honor, also a possibility for the Preakness. David, Gosker might be a good horse. That was only the third start of his career. Based on the low figure and the quality of the field, I would have a tough time liking him in the Preakness. What about you?
Yeah, he's a horse that's only run 3 times, so he still has upside, and there's room for improvement with him. But that was not a fast race, as you accurately said, Brad. And I think the Lexington was more about who didn't show up than who did, because you had disappointing performances from Bullard, who I believe was the favorite in the race, Preeter for Chad Brown, a little disappointing, Hypnotist, who some people liked through the Kentucky Derby prep races. He failed to show up despite the drop in class in the Lexington. So I think those horses just not really delivering their top efforts made it an easier race for Gosker to win. And I suppose the connections could dream big and go on to the Preakness. But as we said at the start, we've got some horses that had qualified for the Kentucky Derby that are going to be skipping the Derby to instead point to the Preakness. Who knows if there are no further defections, maybe Baeza lands in that category too, and that could potentially make the Preakness a stronger race. So I think Gosker still has more to prove that he really belongs in one of these Triple Crown races.
Yeah, he has a lot left to prove, and so does Bullard. But I would suggest, David, that in my opinion anyway, Bullard ran a lot better than his finish position or running line might indicate. He did not have a great trip. He finished well. He galloped out well. It was his first start in some time, his first start around 2 turns. I'm not going to throw in the towel yet on Bullard if and when he shows up next, wherever that is. I doubt he would go into the Preakness off an off-the-board finish into Lexington, but I thought Bullard ran better than looked. Gosker got to the wire first in the Lexington Stakes. It was a low-rated race. David, you mentioned earlier that the journalism with regards to the speed figures, a 108 Beyer speed figure in the San Felipe and a 102 in the Santa Anita Derby. So while the dust settles with regards to the complexion of the Kentucky Derby field, we're going to talk about speed figures. And in my opinion, speed figures are the most influential factor in terms of final odds, not the most important handicapping factor, but the most persuasive with regards to price and odds. David, you're the line maker for NYRA. You set the Derby Watch odds. My question to you is this, before we start talking about these figures, do you agree or not that speed figures influence betting more than any single factor?
I think in general, the answer is yes. If we're talking about any given race on any given day, speed figures influence the betting more so than ever. Gone are the days when Andy Beyer wrote picking winners and speed figures were at edge. Now everyone is aware of the Beyer speed figures or whichever speed figures you use. Any past performance product is going to highlight speed figures, and they really influence how people place their wagers. In the Kentucky Derby specifically, I don't know if speed figures have an outsized influence on the odds because on one hand, yes, everyone's aware of what the speed figures are, whether you have the PPs in front of you or not. They're so discussed as the preps are completed, so you know who the fastest horses are. But the other thing about the Kentucky Derby, Brad, is all of these other factors that go into handicapping, we have so much information about them, such as how horses are training. In any given race, we might not know so much about horses are training unless you're privy to clock reports or things like that. But in the Kentucky Derby, we've got workout videos of all these horses, discussion about them. So that's a bigger factor. Trips are a bigger factor because they're so discussed, even if you're not someone who's very experienced about watching trips. There's so much discussion among different racing personalities about them. So people fold that into their handicapping as well, and quotes from connections about how horses are doing and the plans around them. So I don't know if the speed figures have an outsized impact on the Derby, but in general, speed figures definitely move the tote board.
Well, based on the graphic that we just had put up, there's clearly who the fastest 3-year-old in the country is. Journalism with his 108 Beyer speed figure and 102 in the Santa Anita Derby. He earned both those figures. He overcame trouble in the Santa Anita Derby. Baeza, he's the second fastest 3-year-old in the country with the third highest Beyer speed figure. And then we get down to Rodriguez, and I just want to touch on him briefly, David. He earned a 101 and a 100. The problem or the challenge, I guess, with both those numbers is that they were earned in loose on the lead, relatively soft trips. That's not going to happen in the Kentucky Derby, not in a race where the pace scenario just took a big it's going to be a lot hotter than we may have expected with the addition of Owen Almighty, Citizen Bull, and East Avenue. Rodriguez is not going to get loose on the lead. I still believe perhaps that Rodriguez is not necessarily a need-the-lead horse, but I cannot ignore the fact that his 2 best races were loose on the lead, soft-paced trips. What's your take on those high figures that Rodriguez has earned?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Brad. We've got 5 triple-digit Beyer speed figures on this list, but they're earned by only 3 horses, and Journalism and Rodriguez are the only 2 that have more than 1 triple-digit Beyer speed figure. And I agree, Rodriguez is a horse that has produced those figures in favorable circumstances. We'll see if he has more versatility than what we've seen in those victories, but this is not a race. The Kentucky Derby is not a race where Bob Baffert is going to be able to decide the pace scenario, not only because you've got a horse like East Avenue, who seems like a need the lead type in the race. But in that reporting about Owen Almighty that we got this morning, Brad, we saw quotes from the connections that they believe that Owen Almighty's best chance to be effective in a race like the Kentucky Derby is to win it on the front end the way he did in the Tampa Bay Derby. I don't know if he's going to be quick enough to get in front of a horse like East Avenue or Citizen Bull or others, but that does seem to ensure that it's going to be a more competitive pace scenario for a horse like Rodriguez that he encountered in the Wood.
If this field stays the way it is as of Wednesday morning, 2.5 weeks out, I doubt that the Kentucky Derby will be won in gate to wire fashion. And that's just fine for some of the horses that we have, near the top of the list and on the speed figure chart. Journalism, Baeza, Sandman, Grande. I know that he's ranked down a little bit, but he had a wide trip in the Wood. We talked about that last week in Burnham Square. David, Beyer speed figures are one tool, and so are the Timeform US figures that have the field kind of bunched a little bit closer than the Beyer speed figures. Can you elaborate a bit on the Timeform US figs?
Yeah, Timeform US speed figures are different from the Beyer speed figures in one key way, and that they take pace into account into the final number. So Craig Milkowski, who makes the Timeform US speed figures, makes a final number just like Beyer, and then adjusts it up or down based on whether the race had a fast or slow pace that influenced the time. So if horses achieve that number the hardest way, maybe by setting a fast pace, as we saw in the Arkansas Derby, they're going to get a pace upgrade. If horses did it in an easier fashion, like maybe, let's say, Rodriguez in the Wood Memorial, though that wasn't a super slow pace, but I'm just using it as a point of example, that race is not going to get a pace upgrade in the same way because he ran more even fractions every step of the way. And when those adjustments were made, Journalism is still the fastest horse, as you saw in that prior graphic on the Timeform US speed figure scale, but doesn't have the same edge that we see on the Beyer. I think part of that is due to the fact that the San Felipe is a race that did not feature a particularly fast pace, so it didn't get much of an upgrade in that sense. And really, Craig has all of the preps grouped pretty closely, whereas I think on the Beyer scale, the top 10, there was a 12-point spread from top to bottom, only 5 points in the Timeform US. So maybe this is a more competitive Derby than we were giving it credit for, just sort of anointing Journalism as the one horse to beat. He's the deserving favorite, but how much room for error he has, I think, is still debatable.
That's a really good point. And if we would have had this discussion a week ago, I'd say, well, yeah, of course, Journalism is the rock solid favorite. The more that this race, as we get closer to the Kentucky Derby, the less likely I am to want to back Journalism at a short price. Yes, he's the legitimate favorite. He's won 4 straight route races. He's the fastest horse in the crop of the Derby candidates, but I'm not quite sure if taking a short price on Journalism is the right way to go, so especially since his speed figure advantage, it's there, but it is not decisive. It's kind of a minimal advantage, if any. And we're going to talk about price in just a minute. Going back down the line a little bit, Journalism, he's again, he has the highest Timeform rating and the highest Beyer speed figure rating. So it's a matter of interpretation, I suppose. Rodriguez, a horse, he earned his numbers loose on the lead. He's not going to get that trip. We have a lot more to discuss with regards to pace, and maybe we can address that next week when the Derby field kind of shakes out a little bit more closely. Before we do that, let's talk about the most important factor when it comes to who to bet on. And I know that everybody wants to bet on the Kentucky Derby winner, but if you're betting in the win pool, the most important factor is the price. And before we wrap things up today, let's talk about the price of the favorite. Today, 2.5 weeks out in a 20-horse field, 3-1 is absolutely the right price. He wins races. He overcomes trouble. Like him or not, he will get bet. The question is, how low will he go and what price is fair? So let's take a look at the recent runnings of the Kentucky Derby. And we left out 2020, when the Kentucky Derby was run in September. I thought that you might have priced Journalism a little bit too high, David. I don't think so anymore. Based on, look at some of these horses. California Chrome, he went into the Kentucky Derby off of a resounding win in the Santa Anita Derby. He was only 5-2. I think 3-1 is the right price. By the way, the last 4 low odds favorites from California all won. Nyquist, California Chrome, Justify, American Pharaoh. I know that Improbable started at 4-1. He made his final prep in Arkansas. I'm not saying that Journalism, go run and bet on Journalism, but where do you see Journalism potentially? Could he go lower than 3-1? I guess is my question.
I think it's possible that journalism could go lower than 3-1. As you can see on this list, I was aware of this list when I made the line, and I kind of tried to split the difference, putting him right in the middle there, because there were horses coming into Derbies past that maybe looked a little stronger than journalism, those that definitely looked weaker. So I thought 3-1 was fair for now. I may go lower by Derby Day. We'll see about that. But looking at that list of those 9 runners, Brad, what strikes me is, number one, how successful the Kentucky Derby favorite has been to earn 5 victories in the past 10 years. You'd have a positive ROI if you just bet the favorite every year, given the prices that they go off at. And the other thing that strikes me about that list is I think we did see some of that rich strike effect over the past few years, where the Derby favorite goes off at a slightly higher price than you might expect, because obviously in 2022, Rich Strike won the Kentucky Derby at a gigantic price. And after that, we saw the long shots in the Derby maybe go off at lower prices than you would expect. Horses that might have previously been 70-1 were suddenly going off at 30-1. So that's obviously going to inflate the price on the favorite. A horse that might have been 5-2 suddenly goes off at 3-1 or 7-2. I know there were people last year that thought that Fierceness was going to be somewhere in the 2-1 to 5-2 range based on his huge Beyer speed figure win in the Florida Derby. He never dipped below 3-1. So I want to take that into account when assessing the possible prices of these horses. And I think for now, 3-1 feels right on journalism. We'll see how these developments progress over the next few weeks. There could be further defections, and sometimes the pace scenario can significantly change for these horses. But right now, I am kind of leaning somewhere between 5-2 and 3-1, and 3-1 2 weeks out feels right.
I feel is absolutely right. The favorite's price depends on several factors. I'm going to step into your expertise here, David. First of all, the perceived advantage of the favorite over the rest of the field, the strength of the second choice. Sovereignty is a good horse. He's not quite as exciting as journalism. He doesn't win every start. He has yet to earn a triple-digit Beyer speed figure. Field size also obviously influences the price on the favorite. If this was an 8-horse field, I think the journalism could be 2-1. But for some, 3-1, or even if he goes down to 5-2, might be a fair price. For me personally, today, I am very reluctant to take a short price on journalism, even if I ultimately decide that he's the most likely winner, like the consensus opinion. To me, a fair price on journalism would be 9-2, 5-1, and there's no way he's going to get that. Now, I know when you're betting a 20-horse field, the win pool is not the only way to go. There's plenty of money to be made in the vertical exotics, and crazy horses can slip in and complete the exacta, trifecta, whatever. But for me, as far as a win bet goes, I don't want journalism at 3-1 or 7-2 or even 4-1. I know I'm not going to get the price that I want on him. What is your take on a fair price for journalism?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Brad. I have not gone through that process yet of setting a fair odds line for the race. It's something I will do. And anybody who's watching the video who might not be familiar with a fair odds line, you're just basically setting your win percentages, what you believe the win percentages are for each horse in the race, and converting that to the odds. And then you can compare that to the odds at post time, and it'll tell you, well, I think this horse's real chances of winning are 20%, which would convert to 4-1 odds. And if that horse is going off at 6-1, well, that's a great bet in terms of value. And we'll see if that's the case for anybody in this Kentucky Derby. But I do think, especially for a race that's as confusing as the Derby, making a value line is a great exercise to go through as you're deciding on your wagers. For me, Brad, I think a fair price on journalism might be lower than 4-1. I have to kind of think about it more and see how this pace scenario ultimately does shake out, because pace in the race is going to help journalism a little bit. But I do believe he, at this point, is clearly the most likely winner. How much of a margin he has on the field and how much room he has for error, I feel like I still have to go through the process of handicapping to make that ultimate decision. But if he is 5-2 or 3-1, even if I think the fair price is 4-1 or 7-2, that's still not value. And it might send me looking elsewhere for a horse that is going to be a better price.
You're right that the Kentucky Derby is always a confusing race. And yet, as you alluded to earlier, favorites have won 5 of the last 10. So maybe it's not as confusing as it might seem. The Kentucky Derby field is close to being set. Journalism is the favorite. The question is, how short will he be? There are several X factors that we still have yet to address. Long shots like Luxor Cafe from Japan, Final Gambit, who's never raced on dirt, Sovereignty, we need to go into a little bit more detail on him, and we will. We'll try to talk about those and some long shots next week. Maybe we'll take a look at the pace scenario that at this point today looks like it's extremely hot with Owen Almighty back in the mix. Derby Watch 2025 wraps up next week, next Wednesday. Until then, for David Aragona, I'm Brad Free, and we'll see you next week.